morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever time of the day you find yourself tuning into this period of instruction. At this point, I would expect that everybody tuning in would have already read MCDP 1 TAC 3 Tactics. After this class, in your own free time, I would also encourage you to go back and reread that doctrinal publication. I think that will deepen and further your comprehension and understanding some of the themes and concepts that we're going to discuss today. My name is Major Young, and this class is about winning in combat. Throughout history, one of the most important reasons for the success of the Marine Corps has been the military skill of our leaders at every level. Through tactical skill and battlefield judgment, our leaders have achieved tactical and operational advantage at the decisive time and place. The purpose of this lesson is to familiarize you with the Marine Corps warfighting concept and, more importantly, introduce you to the philosophy that has led to the Marine Corps success over the past 244 years. And I'll do this mainly by focusing on MCDP 1 TAC 3 Tactics, as well as highlighting a few other related topics that will just serve to reaffirm concepts related to Marine Corps tactics. First, before we begin, I want to stimulate some critical thought. So go back to 1916, World War I. After 2 years of a stalemate on the Western Front in France, Germany attempts to force the French into what they believe would be a decisive engagement at Verdun. And they place their faith and belief that the German soldier is tougher in battle than his French counterpart. All things equal, that they could emerge victorious, right? Well, nearly 10 months and 500,000 casualties later, Germany was defeated. And we know that the battle would rage on in France for another 2 years. Well, let's fast forward 24 years into the future. Again, we find ourselves on French soil. This time, however, we see a new German soldier, new German army. And in about a month and a half, they are able to inflict about 500,000 casualties, in addition to capturing nearly 2 million French soldiers. And they defeat France pretty quickly in the opening stages of World War II. What I want you to think about is what changed. You probably immediately, first thing that comes to mind is they're things, right? They're the tools that allowed this to happen. What I want you to focus on for the purpose of this class is some of those leadership qualities that enabled the successful realization and the application of change that contributed to their success. Some of those things may look like military intellect. What is intellect? Military sense. Feel free to pause at any time and if you want to just think about it, right? Or have a discussion with your roommate or someone else in the room who's tuning in. And I'd offer you not a textbook answer, but my own thoughts on it. Probably has to do with being trained and skilled in techniques and tactics of the profession of arms, as well as having the ability to grasp what is important and what is not within a given situation. So how do we, and you, quite frankly, eventually, how do we cultivate, how do we develop and build this military intellect? Well, consider the Afghan fighter who has only known war his entire life and has developed this military intellect by the sheer weight of experience. Right? It may seem rather simple. I can't put you in that type of environment, that situation, and drop you into combat, let alone for your entire life. So how do we match a life's worth of experience? There you are, or a Marine that you will soon lead, and will be expected to cultivate this intellect within. I would submit that training and education also contribute to this intellect and judgment that we're going to discuss. Right? The professional, the student of the profession of arms, who will learn from experiences of your peers here at the basic school, also learn from historical experiences, all right, in addition to your own personal experience. All of those will develop the intellect that allow us to effectively execute tactics. The agenda for today, we'll discuss elements, as you can see, closely aligned to all 8 chapters of MCDP 1 TAC 3, and we'll focus a large portion of the discussion on the 6 tactical tenets, right? Chapters 2 through 7, and then we will round out our discussion with my favorite chapter. We'll finish strong with making it happen. First, let's go back to the beginning, something I think you all are familiar with. MCDP 1, warfighting. Go ahead, take a second and read that short paragraph taken from chapter 4. If I asked you what your biggest takeaway after reading MCDP 1 would be, and you can go ahead and think about it for a second, I'd probably get a lot of different answers, and none of them wrong, most certainly, right? I would also offer you just my own take and my takeaway from reading that book. And great book. You, just like 1 TAC 3, a book that you don't just read once. You go back and you reread it, and every time, and I'll be honest, every time I reread this publication, I learned something new. But my biggest takeaway was that maneuver warfare is a way of fighting, yes, but more importantly, a way of thinking. So how do we develop this way of thinking, right? This maneuverist mindset, if you will. Right? That's the goal, that's the ends. We will use the content of MCDP 1 TAC 3 as the ways and means to reach those ends. So, talk about MCDP 1 TAC 3. Before we get into this definition here, I think it's important to highlight difference between tactics and strategy. Right? I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but I think it's important just to know that there is a difference, right? Strategy is concerned with defining an overall purpose and the priorities, like political or military considerations at the national level, right? It's holistic. It clarifies how the individual battles will fit together and why they are being fought. And strategy's key role is to define the winning proposition, of which all decisions and activities must contribute to. Tactics, on the other hand, are all those actions that will accomplish that objective, that will be taken along the way, right? So it's about successfully executing. If strategy is about picking the right battles, right, then tactics is about successfully executing them. So great definition of tactics. I've seen a couple different ones. This one is by far the best one. A little bit biased, right, because it's a Marine publication, but there are several other definitions. This is the most thorough. There's an art and science, or will come to know, there's art and science to everything. And we're going to talk, we'll start with that in the discussion, but highlight a few other themes that I think you will hear about throughout the period of instruction. Right? Firepower, maneuver, of course, integration of different arms, exploitation of success, sustainment of forces. That's a unique one, right? How did that get in there? We talk about tactics. Well, if you neglect the sustainment of the force of your unit, then I could probably tell you the time on the clock or the spot on the map when your action will culminate. Very important thing to not consider, right? And as you get into FEX 1 and then the patrolling exercises and on to platoon level events, right? This is something that is very important that you need to consider early on in planning. And then back in that last paragraph, right? The techniques and procedures, which we're going to talk about now as we talk about the art and the science. Well, let's start with the science. When I think of science, I think of very very systematic, particular, organized. Right? It also deals with a way and several ways. I think back to chemistry class, and that's a pretty dark time for me, so we're not going to talk about that today. But you think about the chemist, if you will, right, and how they mix things together, and if I mix the wrong amounts or I mix them in the wrong order, then I potentially take off a hand or blow up my lab, right? Same thing could be said for some sort of algebraic equation. Right? I do the math wrong, the steps wrong in the process or procedure, then I probably don't get the right answer. So, a couple words you've heard already, techniques and procedures. We're going to talk about those. Let's start with the techniques. Right? For example, how do you get over the first bar on the O course, right? Well, there's probably a couple different ways. There's probably more than just two, right? But we typically just use those two. You read that taken from reference publication 5TAC 12 Alpha, right? Highlighted general method used to perform assigned missions or functions. That includes using equipment and personnel. So, example I use, techniques for lifting weights, right? In this case, this very strong man is doing a clean of some sort. Well, if you've done some Olympic lifting, you probably know there's many ways to clean the weight. Whether it's like a hang clean, a power clean, a squat clean, clean and jerk, right? There's multiple ways depending on a few things, few factors. You look at the bottom right picture, driving the car, getting from point A to point B, I got to consider some things that look like, well, what is my mission? Am I going to the grocery store to pick up some face masks, maybe some toilet paper, or am I going to the hospital because I need to get tested, right? Like that could change how I drive. The obvious in the picture, but the environmental factors, the weather, the conditions, should also be considered. The enemy, driving a car on 95, I don't know who the enemy is. It may be just the other motorists who are always honking at you, right? Something you're gonna talk about and learn here in a short period is get into tactical planning. This acronym we used called METTC. That'll enable you really to determine the best technique to accomplish these assigned missions derived from learned judgment and experience, right? And then there's, right, talk about cleans, right? That is a way for you strongman fans out there. Most certainly going to clean that. And then, right, the mountain, you got to throw that one in there as he deadlifts a lot of weight. But then there's Dan Green, also deadlifting a lot of weight, right? Different stance, different way, still counts, and he's going to get the points most certainly. What about, let's bring it back, reel it back a little bit to what matters to us, right, in the profession of arms. How I move a unit, and it can be a rather large unit, through an environment that has an unknown enemy situation. Maybe the vegetation is thick. Maybe right, security is most important. Maybe speed and getting to the objective is or at least my assault position is most important, right? And that's going to help me determine what variation or what formation I use. When you get to way down the road, military operations in an urban environment, urban terrain, how do I enter a building? How do I gain a foothold into this building? Can I go bottom up through a window, through the door? Can I take a track, back it up to the building? You will not do here at the basic school, but yeah, you can, and do a top-down sort of clear, maybe some sort of dynamic or explosive breach. Make your own entryway, right? Something to think about. in regard to techniques, right? Why we have them. Not prescriptive, and they allow flexibility down to the smallest level. On the flip side of that, let's talk about procedures, right? If techniques need to be inherently flexible, then procedures is an established or official way, typically associated with a rote learning method, since procedures are mastered through repetitive and habitual training. So you see here the close air support 9 line, and then here's a medevac 9 line. You also have, well, probably a couple different ways to orienteer or land navigate. However, I would offer that you stick to the way that is being taught by the instructor cadre here at the basic school, unless you want to find yourself very lost in the Quantico tree line. Do not navigate by lat long. And then again, here's a call for fire, 6 lines, 3 transmissions. We know a procedure. Procedures need to be easily applied, communicated, or understood in an already complex and chaotic environment. Why do we have procedures? Well, I need to focus and think about other things that is going on, and I don't have time. Not that I don't have time, I shouldn't have to really think too hard about how I bring in close air support or how I evacuate casualties, right? So they ensure accuracy and brevity, because the other person on the radio, whether that's a pilot in the sky or somebody in the operations center or a JTAC, right? They know line 8 before I even get to line 8. They know what is supposed to be in that line, or line 5 or line 6. Go on. It gains time and efficiency, and of course, right, the common language that is understood by all for shared expertise, right, among individuals and units. We often think of how we employ our weapon systems, right? Because if my gun goes down, I need to get that gun back into action rather quickly. So I have a procedure to follow in order to do that, which I'm sure many of you will have to apply. So the science, right? Techniques and procedures. The hard skills that must be inherently flexible and adaptable, techniques. The others that should be commonly understood and executed that will gain efficiency through time, right? Procedures. Okay, let's move on to the art. So I'm not an art major, but if I think of art, I think of an expression or application of creative skill and imagination that often includes a visual form of some sort. Right? So to help us depict art, let's look at some civilian parallels and what breaks out a true artist from the rest of us. Now, I'm not talking, well, I guess you could say American Idol, right? If you're watching that, probably shouldn't be, right? You need to be focused on the basic school instruction. But Michelangelo, and how he understood the human body and anatomy, what factors allowed him to translate that understanding into artwork that would stand for generations. He probably didn't wake up one day and was able to paint and sculpt masterfully, right? Probably spent years and years dissecting human cadavers to gain an intimate appreciation for the muscles, ligaments, and the tendons, and how the appendages move and work with one another. What about these four? Not the boy band of today, but of their day, absolutely, right? The Beatles. Each with their own individual talents, whether it's with a musical instrument or perhaps a microphone. American Idol, right? How were they able to translate their individual skills and talents into this masterful art form? Probably, and they sing about it, right? 8 days a week, playing in Hamburg, Germany at a small, sweaty club, probably like 12, 15 hours a day. And you do that over and over again, you're bound to get good. This one, I should have blown that up. I got to highlight something briefly though on this one. If you look, I don't have my arrow, but the three gentlemen down here who are filming everyone's reaction, probably the only three that missed that pretty epic moment in history. But what turns one man into a symbol that is recognized for decades, right? A legacy. What did that legacy stem from? What pushed him to greatness? Probably some human will, most certainly. But if you're dissecting cadavers for over years at a time, or if you're playing 8 days a week in Hamburg, Germany, or from a very young age, pick up a basketball and never put it down, meanwhile you are gaining experience, right? With the technical skills. So back to the science, right? The instrument, the paintbrush, or the basketball, right? I am developing a sense of mastery with this technical aspects of my profession, of my craft. Then and only then, after mastery is achieved, I can start to inject a sense of creativity, right? And originality, really. So developing those skills and then creatively applying those skills for original thought. And that's where you start to see art, right? The creative application within a given situation. And how it's developed, well, we talked about that, right? Practice, practice, practice. If you ask MJ, experience. If you ask the Beatles, right? Or just training and education. That's what we're talking about. We talk about developing this sense of an artful approach. So science is technical skills, and the art is the application of science and the technical skills in a given situation, right? Sprinkled with some creativity, and of course, that judgment. You can't forget about that. So based on these examples, let's look at how some of these ideas carry over to us as Marine Corps officers. We're talking about the profession of arms, so let's narrow down our focus to combat, and how we view combat. Picture of Stalin there on the left, and you probably think about the Great Purge and what that was, right? Stalin's attempt to remove some of the critical thinkers in his army, the leaders really, who posed a threat to him, and he relieved them, like he killed them, right, for the most part. And he had his trusted assistants seek some of these men out because it was a challenge. It was a challenge to him. He needed to be able to do the thinking for his organization. And he also conscripted about 30 million or so into service, and right with a thought that, well, we'll take this trophy home, right? I have the bigger fist. That's ratio based, and trying to apply some sort of algorithm to achieve some sort of outcome that I want, right? Predictable, prescriptive. Absolutely not, right? And again, one man doing all the thinking for the entire force, a very centralized way of leading. On the flip side of that, deterministic view, right? Let's look at ODA 595, right? A team of 12. This is a DoD photo. Most of you probably familiar with the movie 12 Strong, led by a company grade officer. And end of September 2001, 595 was dropped into northern Afghanistan in the province of Balkh, I believe, and they were tasked initially with conducting tactical recovery of downed aircraft and personnel. That mission immediately changed, and they were to link up with the de facto Northern Alliance leader, General Dostum, after General Massoud was killed, right? And essentially clear Mazar-e Sharif of enemy resistance, all on their own, with what they had, and what they had probably wasn't much, right? And this is the complete contrast to the deterministic view, right? Understands that the environment that we need to be successful in, operate in, is very complex, and there's interactions constantly occurring between, well, the enemy, the friendly situation, and then requires leaders at every level, smallest level, to adapt based on situations that they're posed with, right? Because things are unpredictable, and we can't give you the checklist or the how. So that's a very decentralized approach. We know that as the probabilistic view. And if I were to ask you what view you think the Marine Corps takes on or has adopted, right? You can imagine more likely the probabilistic view. I think it's important, though, to understand the distinction between these two views, because that can drive choices that commanders or leaders may make in combat. So the centralized versus decentralized. I think some of those factors for how much we are willing to lean in one direction start to look like risk, how much risk is involved in this mission, right? Trust between subordinates, adjacent units, their leaders maybe, time constraints, and of course subordinate competence, competence of leaders, right? Stakes are high. Our nation trusts that we're not going to lose. So as we say, hey, probabilistic, no, we understand all these things there in the box, right? But there are some factors that can start to look like leaders heavy-handing or taking on a very centralized face to certain things, and there's some reasons behind that. Let's talk about, we mentioned it, right, the interaction within the environment. So we'll do that by looking at, well, the situation in Syria. We understand that the today's and tomorrow's battlefield is very complex and sometimes ambiguous, such as what's taking place in Syria. And we know. So let's look at some of the complexities that are taking place. So you got Russia involved, of course. If you got Russia, you got to have Iran, and of course, if Iran's there, then Hezbollah's involved. Saudis, because Iran's there, Saudis have to be involved. Up north, you have the Turks, and they're kind of going back and forth with the Kurds, and then you have, as you all know, ISIS. And then these are the Syrian rebels, right? And that's, if I were to translate that, probably not accurately, but that's probably some variation of MS-13. Down south, you got Jordan, and they are down there having, duking out with Israel. And then you got these winners, right? And I don't know if you heard that. I think I just heard a rather large bald eagle buzz by the window. But I highlight this and I say all this because you can't just look at the modern battlefield through a very simple aspect, a single aspect, right? The military lens, which we used to be able to do that. There are other considerations that must be factored in, things that look like, well, the political landscape, economical, social, technological, the informational landscape as well, time as part of the environment, and how all these things interact, right, to include the enemy and the friendly. You have to take this holistic approach to things. And right, there's this proxy war that's being played out on a global scale, rather interesting. And here's because the tactical arena is very dynamic and complex. And the bottom line, right? We need officers like Balderrama Lopez who can recognize opportunity when it occurs in the midst of chaos and seize it to obtain victory. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, it's actually not that easy. Tactics are only present if you and your opponent can evolve and adapt. So pretty soon your company's going to start with tactical decision games, sand table exercises, and really first major endeavor toward tactics. And you'll start to see these enemy counteractions, and you'll build your experience in the art of tactics. So down there referenced is the Commandant of the Marine Corps white letter 2TAC 18 titled Force on Force Training. Get your hands on it. It's one page, probably 3 or 4 paragraphs, and it's a quick, easy read. But that's the Commandant's task to us, you and me, to conduct peer adversary training against somebody that will contest us at range, in depth, and across all domains, right? He's commanding us to test ourselves in evolving and adapting. Why? Because competition breeds tactics. So here is the $100 question, right? And you're looking, there's some students there, you're probably picking apart a few things. I see a weapon, looks like being used as a, anyway, not going to pick apart the picture, right? $100 question, do we teach tactics at the basic school? Go ahead, if you want, pause, have this professional conversation with your roommate or someone else in the room, and I'll give you the answer. You ready? 3, 2, 1. The answer is no. We do not teach tactics at the basic school. We teach components of tactics. Remember, art and creativity is dependent on the mindset. The aim here in classrooms, and it could be a virtual classroom, that's okay. The discussion room, virtual discussion room, or in the Hawk, out in TA-16 in the vast training areas in Quantico, right? All conditions. The aim is to enhance and broaden your experience. And through that experience, increase your judgment. The instructor cadre will provide you with the proven techniques and procedures for you to begin mastering. So that experience and mastery, eventual mastery of procedures and techniques, will allow you to apply a sound approach or tactic to a given situation. These 2 bullets summarize what I just said. I know, it hurts a little bit, right? The answer is no. But hopefully now you have a better understanding of what we mean by when we say tactics, and what tactics is and what it isn't. Right, so let's jump into 6 tactical tenets, starting with really chapter 2, right? Achieving a decision. Before we dive into it, I think it's important to highlight key differences, differentiate between what it means to make a decision and achieve a decision. So system 1, system 2, intuitive approach, or the somewhat slower analytical, which is better for processing rather large amounts of information, although it can be done on a compressed timeline, right? It doesn't have to be slow with the team and take days and hours. You can do it in execution, but oftentimes, right, it's done in the preparatory phase. Intuitive, right, as you can imagine, that's done rather quickly. Think spider on toilet paper. Ooh, toilet paper is a hot commodity. Like, I might go in for that right now, but I'm gonna work my way around and be real reluctant. I may just soften up some paper, right, that I pulled off of the printer. No, not going to do that. Here's the thing: 4-year-old, you can picture it, reaches up to grab toilet paper, right? Probably even looking to grab the spider. I don't know. We know that is like we hit their hand away, say, no, what are you doing? And they're learning, right? They're gaining experience. Okay, the insectologist reaches over and just picks that thing up by the leg and tosses it outside and says, oh, that's a so-and-so, right? Type of spider, and then grabs toilet paper and runs out of your house. Experience. That's what I'm getting at with the intuition is rooted in experience, right? We draw upon our own personal experiences, the file folders, if you will, that we have in our own mind. On the flip side of that, ooh, you know what this looks like. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with this, right? Because down the road on Onville, you got Chick-fil-A, and if I've never been to Chick-fil-A before, like, it's probably going to take me a second to order, right? Well, you and I both know that, particularly if you go for breakfast, right, you get 5 Chick-fil-A biscuits and 10 packets of honey, and there's no question about it. If I don't order that, you're probably going to look at me rather strange. Well, if I'm from another country, if I'm just not familiar, or if I'm on, I got to weigh my calorie counting, my nutrition, what I'm going to do tomorrow physically, right? Start to analyze, and it's not just a snap type of decision. You're gonna get a little bit more about this into this with decision making as you get to the tactical planning. So making a decision, I think we understand that. Now, what we're really talking about is achieving a decision, right? Which will involve decision making in itself, yes, right? But we really seek decisiveness from our actions. And historically, many nations sought to achieve victory using an incremental approach, right? Think of back to Verdun, 1916, in our primer for thought. The slow, methodical grinding down of an opponent, right? 500,000 casualties, 10 months. That's a very attritionist approach that costs a lot of lives, right? So let's take a look at decisiveness. Right. Here we are prior to D-Day, right? Because we seek decisiveness in our actions. So General Eisenhower, right? There were decisions to be made, yes, but at the same time, right, trying to achieve decisiveness. Well, what does that mean? Weather delayed the invasion prior to June 6th, so may have been analytical, maybe not such a snap, intuitive decision. And again, these intuitive decisions don't come from your gut, right? It's my gut instinct. No, a lot of times it's subconscious. It picks up on cues and patterns long before your brain does. Anyway, back to Normandy, 1944. Right? Allied forces made the decision to proceed with the operation based on sound analysis of the situation and the risks that were involved. But how, though, did we recognize that the Battle of Normandy could be decisive? What got us to that place in time where we committed so many forces against Germany? Right? What made this plan the decisive one? A lot of factors, again, decisions to be made, most certainly, to commit the largest Allied invasion on that day at that time. It probably wasn't an arbitrary date, like, we'll just say that, right? Other, maybe through intelligence gathering, knowing that, well, Germany expected us or anticipated us to land maybe a little bit further north, near Calais. Did it also happen by coincidence that Rommel was back home in Germany on leave on June 6th? That probably wasn't by chance, right? But if we had not became victorious, emerged successful less than almost a year later, then this likely would not have been considered decisive. And ultimately, it has to lead to a larger result beyond itself, right? Larger success in the war as a whole. So, if it's not decisive, right, we're not looking to waste lives, waste time, waste resources for the hope of victory. Remember, hope's not a planning factor, right? Our judgment gives us skills to decide when and where a decisive engagement would occur. When the opportunity arises, we have to exploit it fully and aggressively and commit every ounce of combat power that we can muster. Time, as you know, is competitive, and we have to have a decision-making cycle faster than the enemies, right? But we don't seek decisiveness blindly. There are skills that we need to employ to ensure decisiveness. And it's not just enough to make a decision. And some of you may do that, right? We get to tactical decision games or sand table exercises. A decision that needs to be deeply rooted in some sort of critical thought and critical analysis. Right? You can't just throw around decisions haphazardly. Right? Well, here's some keys to that effort. Of course, we discussed understanding the battlefield and the environment, most certainly important. You have to. It would be ignorant if you didn't. Developing this tactical sense. So this coup d'oeil, if any French speakers in the room, I think translates to the power of the glance or the stroke of the eye. If you think back to Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, and he talks about this. And one of the chapters that stands out when they're talking about the Kouros, that 6th century sculpture that the museum in Italy is looking to purchase for almost $20 million or something like that. And then they bring in a team of experienced experts in their field, in their craft, and within a matter of seconds, right? Stroke of the eye, first glance, they're able to pick apart some things that are wrong with this sculpture and basically determine that the thing's fraudulent and that they wasted money, right? So Napoleon, right? There were stories about Napoleon where he would look at his maps and predict where his enemy would be a day, a week, a month from now, and plan his movements out to effect decisive engagements at the place of his choosing, right? That's what we're talking about. Talk about the stroke of the eye. I also have to shape events in a way that allows us several options. So the moment for decisive action arrives, we're not restricted to only one course of action. And of course, we have to concentrate our efforts against an enemy weakness, right? The vulnerability, not a strength. It's not how we want to fight. Think back again, Verdun, 1916. We also have to designate a main effort. That is the unit who receives priority for support, and it must be clear to all other units that they support that unit in its accomplishment of the mission. And the main effort becomes a harmonizing force for subordinates' initiatives. So when faced with a decision, we've got to ask ourselves, how best can I support the main effort? And then lastly, boldness refers to the daring and aggressive behavior, and then the ruthless manner refers to a single-minded pursuit of the established goal. Again, have to be tempered with discipline and judgment. Otherwise, right, it can devolve into recklessness or even potentially cruelty, right? So we must work ceaselessly in peacetime to develop in ourselves a talent for intuitive, decisive decision-making based on our understanding of the situation. Will allow us to identify and pick up on patterns and concentrate our efforts against an enemy weakness of vulnerability. All right, being fast, that's always mattered. And it's mattered since we were in grade school. Because if I'm faster than you, or if we have a disagreement of some sort, let's go race, right? Like that's how we solved our problems and how I throw weight around on the playground. Speed matters. And physical speed matters, right? It's meaningful because moving fast, although important, right, it can change the situation faster than the enemy can react. And it can reduce the enemy's reaction time. So once we've moved past him, moved through him, or beyond him, his decision, his action is irrelevant. Understand though, speed is relative, right? I don't have to be the fastest one on the playground. I just need to be faster than that guy, right? In the context of what we're talking about, tactics, it's meaningful militarily in a relation to the enemy, right? What about speed and time? So making maximum use of every hour, every minute, it's as important as going fast in the physical sense, right, when moving. So the time it takes to plan an action. What about how long it takes for a unit to rest, refit, and refuel, and get back in the fight, delivering close air support or assault support, or the tank platoon that needs to conduct some sort of maintenance, and they get the tank at 120 millimeters of some goodness back in the fight in support. 1 hour, 2 hours, maybe 2 days, right? That matters. In the early 2000s, a study was conducted by Dartmouth, and they looked at 41 engagements that occurred between the Korean War and Vietnam. Highlighted, they picked apart a certain theme that they arrived at, and this is what they found. Victory and success at the tactical level was attributed to a leader's ability to recognize the situation and adjust faster than the enemy. So speed and change, speed and transition, right? I'm sure you recognize this picture. If not, you're trying to put your finger on it. I'm going to click, and you're gonna know exactly where that picture's from, right? Colonel Boyd, who receives a lot more credit for what he provided us as a theorist, but most of us know him for Boyd's cycle, the OODA loop, right, where we transition faster than our counterpart, or than our opponent. So we make observations, perceive, right, take everything in the environment, surroundings, friendly, enemy, environmental factors, right? And we orient. That's one of them, probably the most important aspect of the cycle. So based on observations, we produce a mental image of the situation, right? And we probably run a mental simulation to arrive at a 70% solution, all right? If I'm looking for the 100% solution, well, that's going to take time. That's going to slow things down and potentially hinder our ability to achieve a successful outcome. We're talking about speed. We're talking about being faster. So the mental simulation, I work it through my head and what is known and what is not known to work, and I may make small refinements, right? I gain some situational awareness, and then that awareness will become the foundation to erect a plan, right? Decision based on the orientation, formulate a plan. Right? That course of action is into effect, and this will change the situation. So there's now fresh new information that did not exist moments prior, and the cycle starts over again. Right? We have to be faster than our opponent in all areas, not just the physical sense, right? We have to be faster in our planning and preparatory phase, in our decision making and execution, in our ability to communicate effectively, concisely, and then of course reorienting to continue to capitalize from positions of strength against enemy weakness. Here's some keys to this effort, right, and how we get faster. Well, keep it super simple. I like that better, right? It's appropriate. And because I have every color of smoke under the sun or under the rainbow doesn't mean I have to use it for, make up our own signals that may not need a signal for, right? Or plans that are just complex, because we're already operating in a rather chaotic and complex environment that is riddled with uncertainty. So to make things overly complex, right, that's going to slow things down particularly with our subordinates who um, can take time to stop to think of and work through this ambiguity, right? And then, of course, decentralization, right, based on mission type orders, mission tactics, right, commander's intent. So the intent and purpose, the what and the why, we allow subordinates to figure out the how to solve the problem. Communication, well, implicit, that's something that takes time and it takes experience in working with, as a team, with your unit, with your Marines. And over time, you'll start to develop this implicit communication, and you'll probably see as weeks go on and months into POI, this implicit communication that'll be developed with your SBC or your SPI, right? Be able to pick up on some things. And of course, if communication is just up and down vertical, and I don't laterally communicate with my peers or adjacent units, that's going to slow things down as well. So that it has to be both vertical and lateral. And we'll talk about that in a later chapter when we get to it. And then how I mitigate friction with leadership through my analysis where I identify or anticipate friction to occur or potentially arise. I have trusted assistants that can be in a place where I need them to, or myself, to best influence decisions or actions. And after you gain a experience and a sense of judgment base, then some of these friction points may start to look like critical decision points on the battlefield. Important to develop this speed in all that we do, right? And not just the physical sense, but how we think, how we critically think, how we make decisions. You all will get many reps as we get into TDGs, STEXs, and sand tables. You will have the opportunities to do that. I would highly encourage you to raise your hand and volunteer to get those reps in, and don't shy away, particularly in a place where you get a lot of good feedback from folks at the basic school. Moving on, gaining advantage, right? Do we want a fair fight? You know the answer to that. Think of martial arts and jiu-jitsu, where you're trying to off-balance your opponent and use their own momentum and movements to our advantage. And we exploit the developing situation to achieve victory. So we don't want to solely seek to overpower with our own strength. Again, think Verdun 1916, right? Where you couldn't really put a finger or identify one side or the other as having an advantage over the opposite, right? So in the Marine Corps, we utilize this thing called combined arms and maneuver. Well, combined arms is based on the idea of presenting the enemy with what? A problem? Well, enough time, right? We can solve a problem, and our opponent maybe will do so as well. But we want to pose a dilemma, the unsolvable problem. So using supporting arms, organic fires, and maneuver in a way in which any action he takes to avoid one threat makes him more vulnerable to another. And maneuver, back to, well, you've heard this constantly throughout the class. Maneuver in the physical sense. What if I told you, and that's typically how we think, right? What if I told you that we could maneuver in another dimension? Mind blown, right? Well, traditionally it has meant moving in a way that gains positional advantage, right? For instance, we maneuver in time by increasing relative speed and operating at a faster tempo than the enemy normally would. And we maneuver in time and space to gain advantage and victory at the least possible cost. So again, think our strength against enemy's weakness, right? Well, we also have to, because the modern battlefield is very complex and dynamic, and there's newer emerging technologies, we have to gain an understanding and appreciation for what exists. And it may not always be an enemy combatant that you can see or engage, right? Think the different domains, so not just the physical domains of air, land, and sea, right? Think space, think cyberspace, think the media, and how, right, we have to control some of the narrative as well, and the internet and the digital echo that exists. And the moment you click send, right, or the moment you post something, that is no longer yours. You got to understand that. And that could be turned, twisted, and spun in a way that casts you, or maybe your unit or the organization, or perhaps the institution, in a bad, negative light. So we have to be able to establish a dominance really in all domains, not just the physical ones, but the ones we can't see, feel, or touch, right? Other ways of gaining advantage. We talked about the environment. Here we're talking about really like the physical environment. So you got to understand the effects of terrain, weather, and visibility, and the impact they have on ours and the enemy's ability to fight. The object with terrain has always been to employ tactics to make key terrain, or just any terrain, right, advantageous to us and a disadvantage to our enemy. And the bottom line with weather, right, the unit and the individuals that comprise this unit who are best prepared to operate in adverse weather conditions, think hot, freezing, cold, rain, snow, maybe humid for if you're a hot company at basic school, right? This is experience. This is goodness, because you will gain an advantage over your opponent who may not be acclimated, right? And that's why a lot of times we train in some of the worst places, right? Same can be said for period of darkness or reduced visibility. The unit that can operate effectively during hours of darkness often gain significant advantage. The complementary forces, well, look into, what do you think complement, right? Trying to destroy the enemy between two or more actions. That sounds a lot like, think again, Horns of the Dilemma, the Marine Air Ground Task Force. We are, by law, organized in a way that ensures complementary effects of our forces, right? And the direct, obvious action that may fix the enemy. We also are able to have some sort of unexpected, extraordinary action, right, to finish the enemy. Surprise, right? We got to effectively apply stealth and deception, right? Because that can prove decisive in itself. You have to develop an ambush mentality. You have to seek to surprise the enemy and sometimes get creative by drawing him unknowingly into a trap. And all of our combat actions need to take on this light. I'd strive to be like Mel Gibson, who, like all good fathers, put his kids at risk by having them ambush the redcoats. And then the last bullet there, asymmetry. I want you to think our strength against your weakness. Right? We still fight in accordance with laws, rules, and regulations, but it goes twofold. Think of technical advantage. Think of imbalancing our opponent, applying that strength. Think about the enemy as well, and some of the asymmetric advantages that they've had over us over the past 18, 19 years, and some of these threats that we've thrown a lot of resources at during the recent fight. Right, I can think of one, probably comes to mind for most of you, obvious, right? The improvised explosive device. That would be pretty tough to fight. Something you can't see, and you may not be able to affect an enemy. All right, bottom left picture, Dutch. If you haven't seen the movie, you probably got some homework. But Dutch loses his entire A team. What does he do? Well, he can continue to fight like they've been fighting and potentially lose against the predator, or he can adapt. And we often think of how we adapt in terms of physical things. Again, back to the interwar period, particularly we look at Germany, right? 1916 to 1940, what's changed? And we could discuss how aircraft, individual weapons, ships, our uniforms, or any other piece of military equipment has evolved into something that looks like this, probably not even operated by a human. But here's what I want you to think about, right? Is our equipment the only thing to adapt? And at our level, consider the institutional change MCDP 1 brought about in establishing the baseline for how we are to think and solve military problems. Two ways to adapt. Let's take a look at both, right? So first, the anticipatory approach, based on analysis and understanding of the situation, right? Got to be able to forecast future actions to an extent, right? And begin taking action based on those forecasts. A lot of times, they're based on past experiences. Think anticipation of a team leader on the battlefield who recognizes a change in the baseline in the environment and picks up on a threat that may look like you're about to get ambushed, right? On a larger scale, think the need for amphibious assault capabilities leading up to World War II. Immediate action drills, standard operating procedures provide a way to seize or regain initiative and exploit or create an initial success in the early stages of a developing situation until you can take more considered action. So they provide a basis for adaptation. And how we use or employ some of these emerging technologies, these things that we have, these tools that we have at our use, at our disposal, right? Sometimes it requires just creativity, and it requires forward planning. You have to establish some flexibility, right, in your plans. And you talk about, I know MCDP 1 Tech 3 talks about branches and sequels, right? Branches considered and developed to deal with potential change, the what if scenario. Sequels, on the other hand, developed to continue planning based on an anticipated outcome. So, why do we write 5-paragraph orders if we are probabilists and change and fluidity are the nature of our profession? Why do you think? Well, to give our subordinates, we have to give our subordinates the vision and framework required to achieve decentralization. Other method for adapting the improvisation. So reaction, right, sounds very reactive and unplanned or almost unidentified factors that may exist. Requires intelligent, creative, and experienced leaders who have an intuitive appreciation for what will work and what will not. And then talk a little bit about these flexible plans, right? Enable change in complex environment, branches and sequels again. If you look at these two pictures at the bottom, right, they're not cut off, but just bottom there, the shaving cream, low cost and really a low signature means of marking lanes and then marking location of IEDs. I mean, you got to get creative with it, right? Cutting Q-tips in half and soaking them in IR chem light. That way, under your night vision, you can see these Q-tips, right? Marking a path, marking something. Of course, bottom right picture, you got the Lance Corporal there with a heavy machine gun on the back of a 15,000-pound animal, in which I would probably offer that is very tough to achieve some semblance of cooperation. So, everything in combat is simple and predictable, right? No. With commander's intent, mission tactics, we know what's expected of our units, and we have to cooperate to meet a larger objective, which at the fire team level, I would argue, yes, you are part of a larger objective, right? Now, it can be centralized, top down. One person does all the thinking for the group. Can be decentralized, right? Bottom up and lateral, requires initiative. This definition here highlights two very important leadership traits: discipline and initiative. In pursuit of a common goal. That picture there is the quintessential Marine Air Ground Task Force, right? Units from across the MAGTF, the ground, the logistical, and the aviation combat elements all come together, unified under a single command structure in relationship, and they work together in pursuit of this common goal. When I look at this chapter in 1 TAC 3, I immediately think of the situation paragraph, specifically the friendly section of the 5-paragraph order. Right? Also important because not just the 4 pages that are dedicated to it, right, but the glue that binds us together in cooperation, right? That is discipline. Different types of discipline, and the book goes into rather great detail. We know the imposed discipline, as highlighted here by Grey Worm, standing at the front of the Unsullied. The Prussian army used this type of military discipline to professionalize the ranks. There's also self-discipline. You can see the foreground, this key leader engagement that's taking place, and probably some information gathering with the linguist there, and out of respect, right? The gentleman removes his Kevlar, puts himself down on the level of the elder gentleman, right? Well, look at the background. That's where I want you to pay attention. Right? The background of the guy leaned up against the tree and the wall, not even in the conversation, in the engagement, yet he decided, maybe took it upon himself, to remove his Kevlar. Sounds like a comfort-based decision, right? Those we do not make. And he's also focused, not where he should be, at least, relaxed security posture in the engagement, right? Because I know that there are folks, there are Marines, in this case soldiers, watching, the external avenues that enemy could possibly take, right? There's also, right, team discipline, also, I would say, Marine discipline, self-discipline in teams, responsible for your unit, everything it does and fails to do, also responsible for building the team and ensuring that your team can work together, ensure that they communicate well, they trust each other, and that they are unified, right, rowing in the same direction, if you will. And then, right, absolute discipline. I want you, when you get to the discussion about My Lai, the My Lai massacre that occurred, I want you to think about Warrant Officer Thompson. When you think, you pop into your head, absolute discipline, right? Responsible for actions, decisions of individuals, regardless of if they're in your unit or not, right? So, let's assume you anticipated the enemy's counteraction and you thought through sequels and you've established momentum faster than him and even gained an advantage. Is that enough? Well, first off, you have to have sound military judgment and awareness based on firm understanding of the enemy and the friendly situation, support available, capabilities, limitations, things you can't do, things you have to do, right? And the ability to recognize that you have the advantage and discern where opportunity lies. Then you create more opportunity. And when the time is right, you exploit ruthlessly. So it's not enough just to gain an advantage. Also difficult to recognize those small windows, because they may be very small, when the opportunity presents itself, right? When I can exploit, when I've gained an advantage. So you have to have this opportunistic mindset, right? Well, let's look at a historical example. So World War I, Schlieffen Plan, very similar. Some key leaders in the German ranks, World War II, offered the same approach, because Hitler had to deal with the threat in the West rather quickly and immediately turned to the East to deal with a much larger threat, right? So, bottom left corner, Manstein, General Manstein, May 1940, I would consider a tactician and maneuverist, developed this plan that capitalized on German speed and ability to integrate armored infantry with air support, right? Think blitzkrieg. And looking to exploit a gap of some sort while utilizing maybe to an extent stealth, surprise, and deception. So here, look at the results, and you all can guess what this is. The Maginot Line. A lot of money went into this from France, and the series of forts, reinforced concrete forts that made up this line, much more prevalent in the eastern and northeastern boundary with Germany and Luxembourg there. To the northwest, you have Belgium to the north, and not as heavily defended. Rather fight if we have to in another country, but not in France. Well, 25% of French forces were dedicated to really lining and occupying this static defensive position. So, knowing this, all right, initial plan, just like World War I, exactly what the French think we're going to do through Belgium. However, right, we know things changed, and we're going to use some deception and then advantage, well, the gap, the vulnerability that they made a faulty assumption on, right? This thick forest that existed. Germany was able to get about 2,000 or so tanks and over 1 million soldiers through in a very brief amount of time. And the end result looked something like, pushing Allied forces pretty far to the strait there. And they separated, right? They split some of the French forces to the point where the French ability to command and control and mobilize their soldiers, their force, was just irrelevant, right? They were overcome by events, overcome by the speed and the surprise that Germany had employed. If you want to get a great appreciation, I mean, you can read history, of course, but visually a little bit romanticized, right? You can watch the movie Dunkirk. So exploit success, initial small window that's created, and then push the Allies, right? Continue to exploit, and look for that finishing blow there. Other ways, other techniques to exploit success. First one, consolidation, right? Because it's important to protect the gains that we've made. Risk of losing the initiative, right? And the gain for these gains in the attack. It requires judgment, often to preserve strength, and you got to balance that against potential loss if we continue to push and pursue the attack. Or we've just accomplished the mission, the objective, and now we're in a period of transition, awaiting further tasking, and we could probably rest and refit before we continue to press. We also see exploitation, right? A continued offensive action following a successful attack that's designed to really disorganize the enemy in depth, see that a little bit with the Manstein plan. The book highlights a great example with Rommel in the Carpathian Mountains, the battle for Kut. We also have Pursuit, right? An offensive operation designed to catch or isolate a hostile force attempting to escape with the aim of destroying it. So here you see the Highway of Death, if you're familiar, February 1991, Operation Desert Storm, right? Very controversial attack as the media spins it into almost like a war crime. Pursuit, by definition, yes, right? Consider the Iraqi army was isolated and completely destroyed. So to the extent that President Bush had to step in and order the bombings to stop once he saw the footage, right? And to be honest, right, the military and political objective, the national objective of expelling the Iraqi army from Kuwait was achieved. So you have to constantly be looking to find ways or create this opportunity to deliver a decisive blow. Requires a strong desire to go for the jugular, go for the throat, to be decisive. Think your favorite MMA cage fighter, right? UFC fighter. Wanderlei Silva, hands down, is mine. And regardless of who you pick, they're all going to do the same thing if they sense the enemy opponent's imbalanced, thrown off, or stutter steps a little bit, right? They're not going to sit back. They're looking for it. You got to have an eye that is gained through experience to be able to identify. And then once I identify that, then you go for it, right? You continue to press and you don't let off of them until they tap or until, right, the fight ends and they are destroyed. So how do we make it happen? It's probably this, right? 1 week in my dojo and you got it. You're prepared. Think your favorite or your best Rex Kwon Do voice. Probably not. It's probably, I know, a little less exciting, but the doctrinal development cycle. I want you to view this cycle as a reinforcing causal loop where doctrine is your initial assumption. So the education training that you receive and as you get to the operating forces will enable and facilitate, of course, for your Marines, right? It will and should be firmly grounded in Marine Corps doctrine. And once mastery is achieved and military judgment is developed, you employ and apply that training and education against a thinking and adapting adversary. And you validate or you make refinements that will serve as the philosophical and conceptual framework on which future education and training is conducted. Does that make sense? All right, head nodding. Could be north to south, could be east to west. I can't see them, but we'll press on. So, why do we tell stories? Why do we share experiences? They're educational and beneficial for shared learning. Our doctrine, remember this, doctrinally sound, not doctrinally bound, right? It's a philosophy. It's not meant to be prescriptive in any way. So education is the intellectual development, right? The art. Then training, a lot of artful things there, right? Training is the technical skills, the science, right? Those techniques and procedures that we talked about. And combining these two, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And then, of course, in operational, right, you employ not once but twice and come out victorious. Real life, I think Johnny wins, but besides the point, how does TBS fit into all this, right? We have to teach you the hard skills, the training, to establish your baseline of military knowledge, to give you the leadership and tactical tools, those soft skills, some of them, required to learn officership, right, as an infantry rifle platoon commander. So, the TBS model. You all probably read the student handouts, and in this case, you had a short doctoral publication to read, probably took a quiz, which should have been prior to this period of instruction, and then now you're getting the platform lecture, if you will, probably going to be followed up with some sort of discussion group, sometimes a tactical decision game, and then you will go into a sand table exercise. After that, each step along the way, you are furthering your understanding of these concepts and putting them into practice. And then you get out to the tree line in a field exercise and put them into actual play, perhaps with some force-on-force training, right? And then you do it with live rounds in a live fire exercise. So other key techniques to train and educate, right, as you can see the list there, but terrain walks, something you all hopefully will do later on in the POI, the battlefield study, right? Historical examples, historical study, because all experience and learning doesn't have to be firsthand, right? It can be secondhand, it can be vicarious, and you all will certainly learn from each other as you go through these 28 weeks together. Self-study education, it's critical, particularly during an interwar period. Right? You must remember what got you here may not get you or make you successful in the future. Again, think back to France, 1916 to 1940, right? And there has to be, with this list here, the methods, there has to be a feedback mechanism. That's important, right? And you're going to get a lot of great feedback here in your time at the basic school. Once you finish off and graduate MOS school, you're also obligated to provide feedback to those that you lead, the Marines and sailors. That's important for not your development, right, but theirs and the unit's development. So ensure that you start getting reps at it now, right? How you're going to provide feedback, and you'll do that for some billet holders, right? And here's the thing, right? A true professional in the profession of arms, right, regularly would self-study, read professional journals, because the customer, the American people, rely on professionals for certain things, right? It can be justice, medical treatment, very important now, but also security, right? Those in uniform. And I doubt you would trust a lawyer that passed the bar and never studied law again, right? Think Better Call Saul. Probably not going to call that dude, right? What about a doctor who graduated dental school and didn't subscribe to the Journal of American Dental Association? Like, you'll never know, right? The C average doctor that doesn't attend their continuing education on a semi-annual basis. That's important. So we, as military professionals, have to take the same approach. And this isn't a job, right? It is a career. Because if we fail to prepare, then we're just simply preparing to fail. And our nation's most precious thing, they're not things, right? Her sons, daughters, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, potentially we could waste their time, or worse off, right? They die under our watch while we as Marine officers figure things out, right? Unacceptable. So you start now. And there's no, I know that I said earlier, there's no algorithm, there's no equation to any of this. There's no checklist. I'll offer you one, though, before I get to the summary slide. As you begin to master technical skills and you develop this broad judgment base and you gain some experience, then you're able to sprinkle some creativity, and that is tactics. That will the output will be tactics. All right. So in summary, we discussed for a minute there, right, conceptually, what tactics is, what it isn't. Hopefully you have now a better understanding of what is meant when we talk about the art and science, what it means to achieve a decision and be decisive versus making a decision, ways of being faster, and what being fast in a physical sense being is important, as well as thinking, planning, communicating faster, and then how we gain advantage, right? Utilizing our combined arms and maneuver in all domains, and then some ways of doing that. Two ways of adaptation, right? Improvise and anticipate, and then the importance of cooperating with each other, with peers, with adjacent units, and the harmonizing force underpinning that is discipline. And then how we must create this opportunity to then create and exploit success, and then go for the throat, and then how we make it happen, right, through the doctrinal development cycle. My name is Major Young. Feel free to email me if you have any questions or care to discuss anything that has been brought out in this period of instruction. You can also find me in Warfighting Section Head Office.